The job I went to do, but I got a couple months after I arrived, this happened. Anyone remember? My boss was whisked away. I did not see him for several weeks as he was asked to help make healthcare.gov work so that the Affordable Care Act was not, in fact, repealed. So when that happened, I thought of something that I had read a couple of years before. This is a blog post from February 2012 by a guy named Tom Steinberg, who runs an organization that's somewhat similar to Code for America, but based in the UK. And bear with me for a second. So Tom wrote this in 2012 about a colleague of his who was just an amazing programmer designer guy who, as he said, could have done anything with his life that he wanted to, but had chosen to dedicate it to civic technology, to making technology work for people in a public context. And so, in fact, like many of you here, but unlike any of you here, I hope, his colleague had unfortunately died, and he was memorializing this guy, Chris Lightfoot. And when he talks about it, he says, what Chris fundamentally had right was the understanding that you can no longer run a country properly if the elites don't understand technology in the same way that they grasp economics or ideology or propaganda. His analysis and predictions about what happens if the elites can't learn were savage and depressingly accurate. So this was in 2012, but when healthcare.gov launched and crashed, I really read it as the prediction that Chris Lightfoot had made about our elites not understanding the role of technology in governing the people. He continues on to say that Chris really understood what good society and good governance look like is now inextricably linked to an understanding the digital. If you think about the kinds, when you were growing up, when you were in high school, who did you think was supposed to go into government? Lawyers? And economists? Yeah, we don't think about digital people being in government, but you cannot govern if you don't understand the digital now. So that was sort of my moment of realization that this prediction, I think, had come true. And it was depressing to me because, sorry, I will try to do it, because if we can't implement the policies that we create or the laws that we pass, we can't govern. And that, to me, was the true anxiety underlying those headlines about healthcare.gov. It wasn't just that the president's key policy initiative was under attack. It was that any president with a policy initiative runs the risk then of not being able to implement it. You've got a question.
Yeah, which is with the collapse of the website itself. Was it a technology problem or was it a management problem in terms of that?
Well, it was certainly both.
Yeah, right.
And I'm not the right person to answer that question in depth. Maybe we can get Mikey Dickerson here to give that talk. I bet he would, actually. He gives a talk about it that is savage and depressingly accurate, but also so bad that it's funny. And if you're at all technical, he will make it very, very, very humorous. But it was, I guess the way my partner Tim O'Reilly has put it, it was certainly a management problem in the sense that there was no ability for the people actually doing the work to communicate with each other and make promises to each other. All the promises were made at the political level, and it was planned. It was planned as a large IT project instead of a project in which the people actually doing the work could communicate and learn from the mistakes and move forward.
Can I ask just one more
Yeah,
question?
sure.
I was wondering if it was an issue of, there's two types of programming. There's programmers who follow orders, and then there's visionary programming. And it seemed to me that there was an idea, but there wasn't necessarily a vision quite at the technology level, maybe? I don't know.
I think that is true, but it doesn't, like, you have to understand that there was a There were several thousand people working on the site. There was a prime contractor and I think 35 subcontractors, all of whom had their own teams and their own agenda and their own interest in sort of making themselves look good rather than shipping the product. You have to understand there was huge political pressure. There's such a, I don't think I'm the right person to answer what was the major problem. They bought every piece of vendorware known to mankind and threw it together, which is no way to do a program. They also, the law itself contains essentially a reference architecture written by politicians, which is also no way to develop technology. There were so many things wrong with healthcare.gov that I don't know that any one thing was the thing that killed it, but I think any one of those alone could have killed it. Do you know what I mean? So we'll bring Mikey in sometime. He'll give a much better talk on that than I would. But the thing that I would say about healthcare.gov is that it did in the end sort of bring me back to where we were in San Francisco, in the sense that I remember being at the office very late one night. This was, by the way, the team that Todd brought together to fix the site. There was a team that fixed the site and another team that wrote a news site in parallel, what they called the Marketplace Light team. This was primarily the fixing team, though Jeannie on the end was leading up the write it, just start over from scratch team, which did a great job, by the way. Mikey Dickerson, the guy there standing next to Jeannie, when he talks about this, he added up his hours. He was being paid hourly as a subcontractor to one of, as a contractor to one of the subs. So he looked at his time card, and he had worked 20 hours a day for 100 days straight in one stretch to fix the site. And when I went out and visited these guys in the operations center in Columbia, Maryland one night, Paul Smith, guy in the back, is an old friend of mine who come onto the team to help fix the site. And I looked at him and I said, "Paul, how's your family?" And he said, "Don't ask me about my family right now." These guys were like, it was like they were in a war, right? They knew that if they didn't get the site fixed, we were going to lose the ACA, and they were going to do everything possible to make it work at incredible cost to themselves and to their families. And I think, as a country, we owe them a debt of gratitude that, they will never really be repaid. But I remember being back at the White House one night, very, very late, when Ryan and Mikey were back from the XOC. So they were several, they were an hour or so away from where we were most of the time. And they were telling me about how they could see the traffic on the site at about 2 and 3 in the morning would pick up. And it was largely from people using very low-end Android phones. So the cheapest smartphones with the cheapest plans that you can get would start hitting the site in the middle of the night. Because these are people who don't have internet access at home other than through their mobile phone, and they need health care. And what they would do is they would go on their phones in the middle of the night when they knew that the traffic was lower, and they would just get 2 steps further in the process and then save and then get off. And then they would wake up the next night and they would do that again. Just like who shops for food at midnight, the hungry, who goes on a website at 2 in the morning to get 2 steps further? People who desperately need health care. That's why these guys were doing this rescue, because they knew that they were going to lose the plan. They could see from the data how much people desperately wanted to get through that incredibly difficult site. And we were getting letters constantly from people who were telling us things like, "Thank you so much. I have been living for the past 15 years choosing between health care for myself or my children. Now I can also go to the doctor." Just stuff that would break your heart. That's why they were doing this. And Ezra Klein wrote this really beautifully right during all this mess. It's one of the sanest voices, I think, during the healthcare.gov time. He said that one privilege that those of us who already have insurance have is to excuse the terrible quality of services the government routinely delivers to the poor. We don't know the pain and trouble of interfacing with government bureaucracies that the poor struggle with daily. In other words, if you're poor, healthcare.gov every day. That's what it's like. So, sad, I'm depressing everyone now, including myself. So back to happy things. The team did end up making some progress. So we had this great headline, healthcare.gov is slightly less terrible today. Add plan preview feature that occasionally works. I love consumer reports. They're so great. And then eventually, by the deadline in April, 8 million people had signed up for healthcare through healthcare.gov, which, by the way, was more than anybody had ever estimated before the site fell apart. An amazing accomplishment given how screwed up it was in the beginning. Further great news, we were able to keep Mikey Dickerson on, and we were finally able to launch that United States digital service. As an analog, we don't have all of the power and authority that the GDS has in London, but Mikey has stayed on with a unit within the central part of government, analog to the Cabinet Office there in the UK. The office, the U.S. Digital Service sits within the Office of Management and Budget, known as the most powerful part of the executive branch or of the White House. And he's working on healthcare.gov, the new, the second open enrollment, which, if you guys noticed, opened for re-enrollment on a couple days ago and has had almost no glitches. Go Mikey and team. He's also working on the Veterans Benefit Management System. He's working on electronic medical record transfer between the DoD and the VA, and 2 different projects within citizenship and immigration. Why do you think we're doing that? Because if we do ever get, through executive order or through legislation, if we do ever get immigration reform, we're going to see the same problems. We're going to see that the systems don't scale to meet the new demand.